In 1754 BC, a man in Babylon was dragged to the edge of the Euphrates River and forced to jump into the freezing current. The sun was likely beating down on the dusty banks as a crowd gathered to watch the spectacle. In those days, the river wasn't just a source of water for the crops, it was a divine judge. They called this the ordeal by water. Imagine the terror of standing there, knowing that your life depended on your ability to swim in a heavy current that didn't care about your innocence. If he drowned, the community believed the gods had decided he was a liar. If he survived and managed to drag himself back onto the muddy bank, gasping for air, he was cleared of all charges, and his accuser was executed on the spot. This wasn't a random act of cruelty or a group of people losing their minds in the heat. This was the highest form of justice, written clearly on a 7-foot-tall black stone pillar known as the Code of Hammurabi. We are going inside the minds of the first lawmakers today, from the brutal death for everything rules of ancient Greece to the surprisingly fair divorce laws of 4,000-year-old Mesopotamia. You are going to see exactly how we hacked the human brain to accept words as more powerful than weapons. Stick around for the one specific law from the Bronze Age that is still the reason you are allowed to own property today. Honestly, if you don't know this, you don't know how the world works. Welcome back to Showing Wild Fights. If you are new here, hit subscribe, because what you are about to hear is going to blow your mind and change the way you look at every sign and rule you see in your daily life. For 95% of human history, we didn't have a single written law. For thousands of generations, humans lived in small nomadic bands, moving with the seasons and the animals. If someone stole your goat or your kill, there was no police station to call. You either punched them in the face, or you started a multi-generational blood feud that ended with half the village dead. It was a world of constant, low-level conflict, where the strongest person usually got their way. But as our ancestors stopped wandering and started building the very first cities, that eye for an eye mentality began to threaten the very survival of civilization. If everyone is busy killing each other over a stolen piece of fruit, nobody is farming and everyone starves. This is the story of how we traded our wooden clubs for clay tablets and invented the invisible lines that keep us from killing each other. We are talking about the invention of the law. Think about a small group of hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago. There are maybe 30 or 40 people in the tribe, and most of them are related to you. Everyone knows everyone else's business. If you steal a piece of meat from the fire when no one is looking, you don't need a judge to tell you that you did something wrong. You don't need a written code to tell you the penalty. The punishment is simply that everyone thinks you are a jerk. You lose your reputation, which was the most valuable thing you owned. In a world where you need the group to survive a winter or a hunt, being the person nobody trusts is a death sentence. Anthropologists call this the Dunbar number. It is the idea that humans can really only maintain stable social relationships with about 150 people. As long as the group stays under that number, gossip and shame are the only laws you need to keep order. If you act out or hurt someone, the tribe doesn't put you in jail, they just leave you in the woods to fend for yourself, and you probably won't last a week. But then, everything changed. We discovered how to plant seeds. We started farming the fertile land between the rivers. We started building permanent walls and houses. Suddenly, those tight-knit groups of 150 people turned into 500, then 1,000, then 10,000. This was the birth of the city, and it created a massive problem. For the first time in history, you were walking down the street and seeing people you didn't know at all. You couldn't rely on gossip anymore because you didn't know the guy who just sold you a broken cart or a bag of rotten grain. Shame doesn't work on a stranger who doesn't care what you think. This is where the chaos really started to boil over. Without a system to handle these interactions, the only way to settle a dispute was still violence. If someone hurt your family, you felt you had to hurt theirs back to keep your honor. It was a cycle of revenge that never ended, and it was tearing these early societies apart at the seams. Leaders realized that if they didn't find a way to stop the constant brawling, their cities would collapse before they even got started. Some tribes tried to get creative to stop the bleeding. There is this amazing thing called the Inuit Song Duel that shows just how hard humans tried to avoid total war. In ancient Arctic tribes, if two people had a massive disagreement, or if one person even committed a serious crime like murder, they didn't always go to war. Instead, they held a singing competition. The two rivals would stand in front of the whole community and take turns singing insults at each other. They would mock each other's hunting skills, their looks, their families, and their personal habits. The crowd would watch and cheer for the best lines. Whoever got the most laughs and the loudest applause won the case. It sounds funny to us now, but it was a genius way to let off steam and settle a grudge without anyone actually dying. But as cities grew and trade became more complex, song battles weren't enough to handle complicated property rights or business deals involving thousands of sheep. If you are glad we don't have to fight a whole family or win a rap battle just to settle a debt anymore, hit that subscribe button. We are diving into the first written codes next, and things are about to get much more official and a lot more intense. Around 2100 BC, in the land of Sumer, which is modern-day Iraq, a king named Ur-Nammu decided he was tired of the constant fighting in his streets. He did something that changed the world forever. He wrote the rules down on clay. This is the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest law code we have ever found in the history of archaeology. But here's the thing that surprises most people when they read it. It wasn't about blood or revenge. It wasn't about being mean. It was actually about money and economics. Ur-Nammu was a practical man. He realized that if a citizen kills another citizen, and then the state kills the killer in return, you now have two dead workers. That is bad for the economy, bad for the tax base, and bad for the king's power. So, he invented the legal fine. One of his laws said that if a man knocks out the eye of another man in a fight, he shall weigh out half a mina of silver. Think about how revolutionary that was for a second. For the first time, we had a price list for injuries. If you broke someone's arm, you paid a set amount of silver. If you flooded a neighbor's field by accident because you were lazy with your irrigation, you paid for the lost crops. It was the birth of the legal settlement. It turned justice into a math problem instead of a bloodbath. It made the world predictable for the first time. You knew the cost of your actions before you did them. But wait, the craziest part is still ahead, because while Ur-Nammu was all about the money, the guys who came after him wanted to make sure you were absolutely terrified of the rules. Fast forward about 300 years to 1750 BC. King Hammurabi is now on the throne of Babylon, and he is a master of public relations and propaganda. He knew that for laws to work, people had to believe they were more than just one man's opinion. He had his laws carved into giant black stone pillars called steels and placed them in the center of the city where everyone could see them. At the top of the stone, there is a carving of Hammurabi standing in front of Shamash, the sun god of justice. The message was clear to every citizen. These aren't my rules, they are God's rules. If you argue with the law, you are arguing with the creator of the universe. It was a brilliant way to make people obey, even when the king wasn't looking. Hammurabi's code had 282 laws, and they were way more intense than the Sumerian ones. This is where we get the famous lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If you broke a man's bone, the state got to break yours. But he took it even further with what we call the builder's law. If a contractor built a house so poorly that it collapsed and killed the owner's son, the law didn't say the builder had to pay money. It said the builder's son had to be executed. It sounds horrifying and completely unfair to us today, but it was the first time in history that people were held strictly accountable for the quality of their professional work. It forced people to care about the safety of others because their own lives and the lives of their families were on the line. It was a brutal way to ensure that when you hired someone to build a roof over your head, they did it right. And what happens next? You are not ready for this because as we move from the desert of Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean coast, the laws go from being tough to being downright insane. In 621 BC, the city of Athens was falling apart. Rich people and poor people were basically in a constant state of civil war over debts and land. They needed order, and they needed it fast. So they turned to a man named Draco to write a new constitution. Now, we use the word draconian today to describe anything that is super harsh or extreme, and Draco is the reason why. His solution to crime was very simple and very bloody. Every single crime, no matter how small, was punishable by death. If you stole an apple from the marketplace because you were hungry, death. If you were caught being lazy or not having a job, death. If you didn't pay a small debt to a rich neighbor, death. When people eventually asked Draco why he made the penalties so high for minor things, he just said that even the smallest crimes deserved death, and for the big ones, he couldn't think of anything worse than death to give them. He literally wrote his laws in blood instead of ink. He thought that if the fear of the state was high enough, nobody would ever break a rule again. But he was wrong. It didn't make society better. It just made everyone live in a state of constant terror and resentment. The citizens of Athens eventually got so sick of the blood laws that they decided to get rid of the next guy who tried to be that strict. Legend says they actually smothered a later lawmaker under a pile of cloaks and hats at the theater until he suffocated because they were so traumatized by Draco's era. They wanted order, but they didn't want to live in a graveyard. It is wild how much of our modern life is built on these ancient ideas. If this is hitting you right now, drop a law in the comments so I know you are following the timeline. We are about to see how the common people finally fought back to get their rights in writing, so the rich couldn't just bully them anymore. While the Greeks were busy with their death penalties, the Romans were building something much more practical and long-lasting. Around 450 BC, the Roman Republic was having a massive internal struggle. You had the patricians, who were the rich elites, and the plebeians, who were the common workers and soldiers. The problem was that the patricians were the only ones who knew what the laws actually were. They kept the rules secret in their heads and would just make things up on the fly to suit themselves whenever there was a dispute. If a commoner went to court against a rich man, the judge, who was always a rich guy, would just say, "Oh, there is an old law that says you lose and have to give him your land." The plebeians eventually got fed up with being cheated. They didn't start a riot or burn the city down. They did something much smarter and more effective. They went on strike. They literally walked out of the city of Rome in a massive group and sat down on a nearby hill, refusing to work, bake bread, or fight in the army until the laws were written down where everyone could see them. This was the Secessio Plebis, the first recorded general strike in history. It worked perfectly. The government realized they couldn't run a city without the workers, so they were forced to write the 12 tables. These were bronze tablets posted in the Roman Forum for everyone to read, ensuring that the law was public and couldn't be changed in secret. One of the laws in Table 4 is pretty shocking to us today. It said a father had the legal right to sell his son into slavery 3 times. If the son managed to gain his freedom and come home 3 times, and the father sold him a 4th time, Only then was the son legally free from his father's control. It sounds incredibly cruel, but it shows the law slowly moving authority away from the head of the family and toward the state. The Romans also gave us the idea of habeas corpus, the concept that you can't just be thrown in a hole without a specific legal reason. They were the ones who realized that the law shouldn't be a secret weapon for the powerful. It should be a shield that protects the weak from the whims of the strong. Hold on, this next part changes everything, because we're about to move from laws that control your body to laws that try to control your soul and your character. Around the same time Rome was figuring out its bronze tablets, other parts of the world were focusing on the moral side of the law. Think about the Ten Commandments or the ancient Hebrew laws. Before this, laws were mostly about what happened if you got caught by the authorities. Don't steal because the king will cut your hand off. But the shift toward moral law changed the game entirely. It introduced the idea that you shouldn't steal because it is inherently wrong, regardless of whether a guard is watching you. It made the law portable. You didn't need a cop on every corner if people believed they were being watched by something higher than a king. It put the law inside the human heart. Then you have someone like King Ashoka in India in the 3rd century BC. Ashoka started out as a brutal conqueror who wanted to own everything. He fought a war so bloody that when he walked across the battlefield afterward and saw the thousands of bodies, he was so horrified by the suffering he had caused that he had a total mental breakdown. He converted to Buddhism and decided to rule through kindness instead of fear. He carved his edicts on giant stone pillars across Asia. These weren't laws about taxes or punishments. They were laws about religious tolerance, being nice to your parents, and even protecting animals from harm. He was the first leader to suggest that the state has a moral duty to care for the well-being of all living things. It was a massive leap forward in the evolution of how we think about what a law can be. It wasn't just a cage, it was a guide for how to be a good person. But here is the twist. The most famous set of laws in history was actually a giant PR stunt, born out of a midlife crisis for a king. When we look back at the Magna Carta in 1215, we think of it as this beautiful, poetic document about human freedom. But at the time, it was just a bunch of angry barons forcing a really bad king, King John, to sign a contract because they were tired of him taking their money and losing wars. King John didn't want to sign it, and he actually tried to ignore it the second the barons left the room. But the Magna Carta did something that no stone pillar in Babylon or bronze tablet in Rome had ever done successfully. It established the principle that the king himself was not above the law. That is the exact second the modern world was born. Before that, the law was something the powerful used to control the weak. After the Magna Carta, the law became a net that caught everyone, even the guy wearing the crown. It was the shift from the rule of men to the rule of law. It is a fragile hallucination that we all agree to participate in every single day to keep the peace. Think about it. Why do you stop at a red light in the middle of the night when no one is around and there are no cameras? There is no stone pillar there with a god carved on it. There is no King Hammurabi threatening to throw you in a river. You do it because you are part of a 4,000-year-old experiment in human cooperation. We realized a long time ago that while violence is fast, cooperation is permanent and leads to better lives for everyone. We traded our ancient right to do whatever we want for the security of knowing that our neighbor won't do whatever they want to us. Laws aren't just a list of don'ts or a way for the government to annoy you. They are the operating system of the human race. They are the reason you can buy a house, get a job, or even just walk down the street without looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. Every time you sign a contract or read a terms and conditions page on your phone, you are standing on the shoulders of those Sumerian farmers who decided that silver was better than blood. You are benefiting from the Roman workers who sat on that hill and demanded fairness. Next time you see a no parking sign or get annoyed by a piece of red tape at the DMV, don't just roll your eyes. Remember that stone pillar in the desert. Remember the Roman workers sitting on that hill in the cold. We spent thousands of years bleeding and arguing and dying just so we could have the privilege of settling our problems with words instead of axes. We moved from the chaos of the blood feud to the stability of the code. It wasn't an easy journey, and the path was often written in blood, but it is the greatest thing humans ever invented. We turned our survival into a system, and in doing so, we gave ourselves the chance to build a world that actually works for more than just the strongest person in the room. Think about the weight of that history. Every time a judge bangs a gavel in a courtroom today, it is an echo of a hammer hitting a stone in Babylon thousands of years ago. Every time a new law is debated in a courtroom or a parliament, it is the continuation of a conversation that started in the Athenian marketplace. We are still writing the code. We are still figuring out what is fair and what is just as our world changes. But we are doing it together, and that is what makes us civilized. The journey from the river jump to the modern courtroom was a long one, but it is the reason you are here today, living in a world defined by rules rather than by who has the biggest club. And honestly, that's a fight we've finally started to win.